Okay, our topic is the n1mm logger in depth. Tonight is part 2, digital modes and multi-op contesting. We have our team back with us again tonight, and at this point I'm going to hand it off to Rich Furch, VE3 Kilo India. Rich, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I guess a brief introduction here. This presentation is going to be split in two since it's two separate subjects. I'll be giving the first part. I've been contesting CW and RTTY for, well, since the mid-90s, and I've been using n1mm since 2003, I think, first for RTTY, and then pretty quickly I added CW as well. And I guess I'm a little pistol as far as contesting goes, but I've been using the program for a while, and I'm pretty familiar with it, and I do quite a bit of the documentation for, on the website for digital modes. Steve, very well-known contester, totally different level from me. He's one of the programmers, and he's particular expertise on multi-op or multi-computer and SO2R. I should mention that the guy who did the digital programming is Rick, n2mm2. He's done pretty well all of the digital mode programming on n1mm, and he deserves the credit. The other two folks on the line here are Larry, K8UT. Larry is the webmaster for the n1mm website. He's a RTTY contester as well, and looks after some of the RTTY documentation, the RTTY function key messages, and so on. And Pete Smith, another long-time user of the program, CW and SSB, and he's probably the main manual writer. So with that, I'll move ahead into the digital mode part of the presentation. Okay.
Go ahead and click in the window and then hit page down.
Okay, there we go. I should mention here, those of you who were here for last week's presentation where we had the problems with the video clips, the presentation has been redone and it's up on the PVRC website with some of the video. We did find, though, that there was a problem with the video versus audio sync in those clips. So the clips themselves are also up on the n1mm website under instructional videos, and please feel free to go there and look at them. As far as this week goes, not going to be any video. We're going to do it with static slides. So I'm just going to give an overview of the digital modes, a little bit about the installation and configuration, not a lot, and talk a little bit about how you actually use it in a digital contest. First thing is just to mention that n1mm logger has supported for a long time digital modes. RTTY certainly, also PSK31 or PSK63, and various other digital modes, most of which aren't used for contests. It supports both FSK and AFSK RTTY, so you take your choice. It'll do it either way. And there are several different ways you can do it. You can use an external terminal unit or TNC, like a HAL DXP38 or a CAM or a PK232. You can use MMTTY, which is probably the most popular for RTTY. You can use mmVary, and for the last year or so, mmVary has now supports FSK as well as AFSK RTTY, and it will do PSK and MFSK modes. And there's also support for FLDigi, which will do AFSK but not FSK RTTY. It'll do PSK, and it has a whole bunch of other digital modes in it, which, again, they're not really contest modes, but you can use the program for them the same as you can in PSK. mmVary comes pre-installed with the program. You don't have to do anything to install it. But if you want to use MMTTY or FLDigi, you have to download them and install them separately, just as if you were doing it standalone. And then what you do is, certainly with MMTTY, is set up a copy to be run from inside n1mm. If you put a copy of the program in a different program folder, and really all you need is the exe file and the ini files, that way it can have a different configuration. And as I will describe a bit later, n1mm logger supports multiple MMTTY windows, each with a different configuration. And to do that, you need to put each of them in a separate folder. So you can have 2 digital interface windows and 4 additional receive-only windows. So you could have 6 copies of MMTTY all going at once and all linked to the same copy of n1mm logger. Configuration. Well, the first half of the configuration is getting the hardware working. You need some means of getting receive audio into your sound card from the radio. You need some way of modulating your transmission, either audio from a sound card back into the transmitter or on-off keying of an FSK transmitter. You need some way to turn your transmitter on and off, transmit-receive switching. Some radios will let you do it with Vox. Some interfaces, the Signal Link in particular, does Vox externally. So both those are dead easy to configure. You don't have to configure PTT. But I think most users probably do configure PTT, and you do that from a serial port. You can do it either from within n1mm logger or from within your digital engine MMTTY. And that gets you into some configuration issues. MMTTY and n1mm logger are 2 separate programs running in parallel and talking to each other. They can't share a serial port. It's got to be one of them or the other. There's a digital checkbox in n1mm configurer that allows you to timeshare a serial port. There are dozens of different ways to interface your radio with a PC, and so there's no simple cookbook on how to configure stuff. And really, my main point on configuration is you're going to have to look at the manual. In particular, the contest mode selection has an effect. You need to be in a contest that supports READY or PSK digital modes. The configurer window, there are at least 3 tabs under the configurer where you have to do things to get the digital mode set up properly. Then in the digital interface window, there's a setup menu, an interface menu. That's the one where you select MMTTY or MMVary or FLDigi or whatever. There's a digital setup window which has a number of tabs in it, and there's things in there you will want to configure. And if you're using MMTTY, it has its own setup window and its own stuff to be configured. So you're not going to be able to just pull it out of the box and start to run it without looking at the documentation. I think you can't expect to find all these things without some prior knowledge. So my suggestion here is do read the manual. The getting started part of the manual has a chapter on basic digital installation and setup, and you should go through that rather than expecting to start up 15 minutes before the contest and simply be able to use it. It's not quite that simple. It'd be nice if it were, but the way the world works, the way the variety of possible hardware and software configurations is just too great. I do have a couple of fairly common configuration issues I can mention here. When you configure a serial port for FSK keying or for PTT, you have to remember to set the digital window number, even if you only use one window. I believe this starts out at 0, and if it's at 0, that port just isn't going to get used. If you're using only one digital interface window, of course it's set to 1. If you're using 2, then you need 2 COM ports, one for window 1 and one for window 2. And that's separate from the radio number because you can have 2 windows with 1 radio if you're doing SO2B. Another thing that I see quite often, not only on the logger user group but on other programs as well, is people who start up, they put their radio in RTTY, and then they say, how come I'm only getting a carrier, no modulation? Well, if they're in FSK RIDI, they need a keying circuit. And if that keying circuit needs to be configured in MMTTY, and if you're using a USB to serial adapter, you may also need to use the EXT-FSK plugin. All of that's discussed in the documentation, but it's things that trip people up. Also, the digital messages, message keys look different in digital modes from CW. They include TX and RX macros for turning the transmit, switching the transmit and back to receive, which the CW ones don't. Okay, digital interface window. This is what it looks like when you're operating. This is what it looks like on my system, at least, with the colors I've chosen. I'll just sort of go over what's in the window. You notice in the main receive window here that the call signs have been highlighted. The color of the call signs here indicates the multiplier status. So this particular call sign is a multiplier. It's in red. There's a grab window over here that decoded call signs show up in. And there's a grab button, or there's a macro command that you can pull them off this window to put them into your entry window. Or you can simply mouse click. If I mouse click on this SV3DCX, it goes right into my entry window ready to complete the QSO and log it. You can also click on exchanges, and that moves the information to the entry window. There's a bunch of additional buttons. If you were here for the presentation last week, the entry window has 12 buttons. This window can have up to 24 more buttons. Unfortunately, there's no keyboard way to get these ones. You have to do them with the mouse, but that's okay, as I will describe in a minute. My favorite way of operating RTTY with n1mm logger is very mouse-centric. I hardly ever touch the keyboard. A couple of other little, well, there's the transmit window below the receive window. That's where you put free-form text and use the transmit and receive buttons. There's a window up here which you can use. It's not doing it here because this is a static picture, but if I put the mouse over text here, it will show it in the opposite case, numbers versus letters. So if you're seeing the TOO stuff for 599, you can mouse over it and see what it's supposed to mean up here. This mouse over also shows you what would be moved into the entry window as you're ready to click on it. So here's the really basic minimal windows that you would need to have open to start operating. Actually, in any real operation, you'll have more. You'll have the band map, you'll have the log window, you'll have various other windows open. But these are the ones that are essential. And the key one here actually is the digital interface window. That's where all the text that goes back and forth between you and the other station appears. And in fact, by clicking in this, information is transferred automatically into the entry window, which is still the main control window. That's still where logging is done from, but you can actually arrange things so that you don't have to, you hardly have to touch the entry window. It's just there doing its thing. And then over here we've got, this is the MMTTY window, and I use this mainly as a tuning aid. Tune the station in. I like to use the crossed ellipses. And there are a few control buttons that you can use in here if the situation requires it. So here we are. I've started off and I have sent my CQ message. And in InterSense message mode, the button, the F1 button here, is highlighted, indicating that the enter key sends that message. The way I like to operate is with an option where the right click in the digital interface window does the entry key. So I actually sent this CQ message by right clicking up here. I hit right click and that sent the enter, which sent the highlighted F1 key. So what's next? Well, somebody comes back. If you're lucky, somebody comes back to your CQ. It even happens to me from time to time. And here I've got Larry, K8UT, has come back. You'll notice his call sign is in red. That's because the program knows that he's a new multiplier. If it didn't know he was a new multiplier, he'd be in blue. So here I am sitting here. Okay, I've got somebody's called me, and he's even going to be a new mult. And so the next thing I do is left-click on his call sign. And when I left-click on his call sign, what happens is it's dropped down into the entry window. the ESM focus changes to F5 and F2, so it's going to send his call and my exchange to him. So immediately after left-clicking, I right-click. That effectively hits the enter key for me and sends my exchange. KUT, Rich on. I like the exchange model where I send his call sign at the end again. That's an RTTY trick because quite often the first one gets covered up by late callers or just QRM or whatever. So I've sent him the exchange. Notice that the focus has moved to F8, the again message. That's because until we enter his exchange in here, we're not ready to finish the QSO. And the way this is configured to send an again message. You can also configure it simply to repeat your call sign and exchange over again. You can do that either way. This happens to be with the again. But as soon as I copy his, as soon as he sends his exchange, here it is, Larry, Michigan, then the next thing I'm going to do is left-click on the exchange. This exchange has two elements in it, so normally I would have to click twice. Actually, I'm fortunate in this case because either I've worked Larry before on another band in this contest, so the program knows what the exchange is, or I have him, and in fact I can see here, I have him in my call history file, which is another option I'm using, which preloads the name and state for me. So all I really have to do is click on parts that have changed. So here we are. We've got the call sign and the exchange in here, and the focus is on thank you and then log it. And when I right-click here, it sends my thank you message. And that's what I was using as a QRZ message in the NAQP the other weekend. And the focus is back on the CQ message. So if nobody answers this one, then when I right-click, it'll send my CQ message. So that's sort of basic operating in run mode. S&P mode is pretty similar. You find somebody, you left-click on it for the call sign, you right-click to send your call sign, you left-click on the exchange he sends you, and you right-click to send your exchange and log the contact. So you do all this with the mouse, and you hardly ever have to touch the keyboard. Now, I also like to use an option called digital call stacking. This is an example here. Two stations have called me pretty much at the same time, W5XB and K1QN. As it happens, the program doesn't know whether either of them is a new mult or not. I haven't worked them before in the contest. What I'm going to do is click on W5XB first, and then click on K1QN. And what happens is W5XB gets put in the exchange, the call sign window, exactly the same as usual. But when I click on K1QN, his call sign gets stacked up behind, and you can see it in the on deck circle. I'm not going to go into great detail about how the process works from here. There's a very good there's a couple of very good instructional videos on the website that Larry has prepared to show how this works. It's digital call stacking. It's also called log then pop. Just to show you that at the end of the QSO, instead of sending the regular thank you message, it automatically sent my thank you now message. When I right-clicked at the end of the QSO, it sent W5XB thank you now, K1QN, here's your exchange. And then I carry on and complete the exchange. So here I've essentially done 3 QSOs in a row with about a dozen mouse clicks, about equally distributed between left and right mouse clicks, and never once touched the keyboard. So that's sort of a quick run through what using the digital screen looks like in InterSend's message mode. I'm going to quickly show a couple of other features. One of them is, I mentioned earlier, you can have multiple receive windows and multiple copies of MMTTY. This is one showing I've got 3 copies all running from the same audio, from the same VFO. This one's the standard MMTTY. This one is fluttered signal profile, and this one is the multipath profile. If this were a fluttered signal or a multipath, you might actually see a significant difference between them. As it was, there was very little difference. If there was any difference, the standard one seems to be the best. But in poor conditions, having 2 or 3 of these open at once can save you from having to ask for a repeat. You don't see it in one window, you see it in another, and all 3 windows are clickable. So whichever one works, use it. The transmission still goes from the main one, but receiving can be from any of these. The other thing I'm going to show briefly is a feature, SO2V, which sort of leads into SO2R, but I'm not really going to talk about SO2R. The earlier one, I showed you the logged in pop. That was a case where people were calling in 2 and 3 at a time, and I was rattling off 3 and 4 contacts a minute. Things were going pretty good, so I was quite happy with only one VFO. Later on in the same run, I found myself calling CQ over and over and over again, and I was only getting one responder every couple of minutes or so. And at that point, I like to have the second VFO going, and with a 2-receiver radio, in between my CQs, I can be tuning the second VFO and listening, seeing if there's somebody there. If I find somebody that I haven't worked yet, then I can click in the VFOB window and work the guy. And if nobody's come along and grabbed my run frequency, because I've been away from it for the duration of an entire QSO, then I can go back to CQing again. So, and I do this, so I've got runs where I'm sitting on one frequency and looking in the log, you'll see 4 or 5 on the same frequency, then suddenly 1 or 2 on other frequencies, and then back to the run again as the sort of random chance when people come by your run frequency. Sometimes there's gaps, sometimes they come together. So this is a handy feature using using a 2-receiver radio. Now, I should say this window only shows, again, the bare essential windows. In real life, I would have a couple of band map windows open. I'd have the available mults and queues info. I'd have the log, the score. So there's a bunch of other windows open on the screen. If I tried to show them all on this slide, you wouldn't have been able to see any of the letters or text in any of them. So, which is why I chose instead to focus on just these windows. I'll just mention a couple of other features. I've been describing a mouse-oriented way to operate. You can operate from the keyboard, although not all of the features are possible from the keyboard. Those 24 extra keys are mouse buttons. There's no keyboard shortcuts for them. And the left-clicking on call signs and exchanges. There's an equivalent for call signs. If they're in the grab window, you can use an Alt-G to pull them down, but there isn't really a direct equivalent for exchanges. You would have to type them in if you didn't want to use the mouse at all. Automatic frequency control, it's a feature, AFC, it's a feature in MMTTY and many RTTY decoders. It's something you don't want to be using when you're searching and pouncing. You want to tune to the other guy's frequency and be on his frequency. But when you're running, you want to be able to answer somebody who's just a little bit off. So you'd like to be able to switch the AFC on during a QSO, then have it drop back to the default at the end of the QSO, and have it switched off during S&P. That can all be automated. When you're doing AFSK using an SSB transmitter, the dial frequency is not the actual frequency that you want to spot if you're spotting, and it's not the frequency you want to tune the radio to when you tune to a spot. And the offset frequency calculation can be automated. Call sign checking. I mentioned before, call signs show up in the color that denotes their multiplier status. The routine that does the deciphering of what is and is not a call sign can be set up either just to look at generic patterns, XY, 1, ABC matches a generic pattern, so it's okay, or you can tell it to be restricted to the master DTA file and show non-master.dta call signs in a different color, because if you think they're a bit more suspicious. Depends how noisy conditions are. RTTY copy is not always perfectly clean. Quite often you get kind of strange-looking garbage on the screen. What else? Okay, PSK. If you're used to doing PSK31 with other programs, you may be used to having one of these multi-channel browsers or broadband decoders. N1mm supports that as well. You can have two different methods of doing multi-channel receive windows in MMVary, or you can use FLDigi. It has a browser like this. So this is the thing where you can watch everybody who's on the band within this 3 kilohertz wide swath of band, and you can click on any one of them to go to that one. I guess that's about it for the digital modes. I would encourage you to go to the website n1mm.com, select the Documents menu, and then select Getting Started, and go to Digital Installation and Setup for the basics. And then when you've got more detailed issues you want to look at, digging deeper, digital modes. And perhaps before doing either of those, or between doing those two perhaps, you might want to check out Larry's instructional videos, which are on the same website under the Support menu under Instructional Videos. And with that, I guess I'm done, Ken.
Okay, and at this point you want to hand it off to Steve?
Okay.
So,
okay,
Steve.
I am here.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Good evening or good morning or good afternoon to everybody on the conference. I'm going to talk about multi-op support, which is sometimes called networked computers, multi-computers. They're all synonymous terms here, the way I'm using them. I'll first talk about the capabilities, the kind of information that gets sent between network computers. I'll then talk about some of the principles of networking for n1mm, how to configure it, things to watch out for when you configure it, how to do some testing before the contest to make sure everything's working right, things to do and maybe not do during the contest, and then what you should do just after the contest ends. Okay, go to the next slide, please, Rich. Let me just say before I jump into this that this is kind of a difficult subject to cover, so that both people who are just users know how to configure it, and people who want to understand a little more detail on what's going on underneath the covers get what they need out of this. So if you see areas that seem too simple, just hold on. Believe me, it will get a little more complex. And if I start to go over your head, just hold on, and I'll come back down to earth soon enough. Well, the capabilities in network computers is to exchange information between the network computers that are all operating together in the same contest. They exchange information on QSOs that are made, what frequencies each radio that's attached to the network computer is operating on, information on whether each attached station is transmitting or receiving at this time, DX spots that come in externally from a spotting cluster are sent across the network, GAB messages that let you talk to other members of your multi-op team are sent. One very important thing is log synchronization to make sure that things stay in sync, so that if the network goes down temporarily or a computer goes down, getting everybody back on the same page together. And I'm going to talk a lot about that. There are also keep alive messages, so that each computer knows that the other computer is alive and well, or maybe not so alive and well. We support a maximum of 16 networked computers. Some other things that folks have done with the network computer capabilities is to use it simply as a backup when they're single op. When you're single op, it's best to, of course, keep a transaction log, which is one of the options. But you could also connect two computers together and have your backup occur on a completely different computer across the network. Some other users, primarily those coming from other types of software, have used SO2R in a two-computer mode. It may work. Some people have had some good success, but it's not officially supported by the n1mm team. Okay, Rich, next slide. Okay, this is just the basic topology of what's going on here. Now, each station as shown here is not just a computer, of course. It's a computer with an attached radio, with keyers, other interfaces for doing antenna switching, and so on. But I'm just going to simplify it for the purpose of this talk to show them as stations as computers. They're all connected together through a common router, and DX spots coming in outside all are routed to station 0, and then station 0 sends the DX spots to each other station in the network. So each computer has its own IP address. Okay, Rich, next slide. Okay, this is probably the most important slide of my entire talk. So if you understand what's going on in this slide, you'll understand everything else also. All of the stations in an n1mm network setting are connected together in a peer-to-peer network. In other words, there's a connection from each station to every other station. A fully meshed grid, some might call it. And this is important because a lot of people come in with the notion that it's a client-server arrangement, and that's not true. It's not a client-server setup. It's simply a peer-to-peer network. We're fully interconnected with TCP connections from each station to every other station, and each station keeps a complete local copy of the database. In other words, again, it's not a client-server where there's one copy of the database. There's a copy of the database on each station. However, each station only owns those contacts that are made by that station. And what I mean by owns that station, owns those QSOs made by the station, is that that is the only trusted source for QSO information. So if, for instance, station 1 makes a contact, it is the only trusted source for QSOs made by station 1. And if station 2 wants to know about QSOs made by station 1, it asks station 1 as the trusted source. So when a station goes offline and then comes back online, all the contacts made by that station are resent to every other station. And this is called a resync. This is a very important capability that we have to keep the logs in sync with each other. Okay, next slide, Rich. Okay, configuration. What you want to do is you bring up the networked computer names table, which is in the SO2R menu. And there's a number of things here that you need to fill out. There's a station number where it says STN number 0 through 15. So each station must begin with a station number. And then optionally, it can have a colon followed by a station name. But you can't just have a station name again. You have to have that number followed by a colon if you want to have more than just the station number. The computer IP address can either be the actual IP address or some kind of DNS resolvable computer name like shown here with station 2. I prefer to use IP addresses. Things can happen during a contest where, for example, station 2 something happens to that particular computer, you plug in a new station, it's no longer named Station 2, it's named Backup, for instance, and suddenly nobody can reach that new computer because they're looking for Station 2. So I think it's much clearer to have an IP address when something goes wrong and you're trying to debug it. You can see what IP address you're trying to connect to. You can go to that computer and see if indeed it is that IP address. The order of stations in the network computer table must be identical on all stations in the network. In other words, in this one, the first one, the IP address is the last 3 digits are 125, followed by 143, followed by Station 2, followed by 116. You need to keep the same exact order on all of your stations in the network and not mix them up. Otherwise, you will not be able to connect to each other. Okay, next slide, Rich. Oops, computer just went to sleep. Okay, it's back. As I mentioned before, I prefer to use IP addresses, not computer names. I would also say that you should use either static IP addresses or what I'm calling fixed dynamic IP addresses. The important thing, what I'm trying to get at here, is that you don't want the IP address to change out from under you while you're operating the contest. If you're in a LAN environment and you use the same router, it will assign the same dynamic IP addresses to the same computer all the time. And that's a very good thing, because it means that if station goes down, you need to reboot it for some reason, when it comes back up and reconnects to the router, it will be assigned the same IP address. However, if, let's say, your router breaks during the contest, or you don't think it's working right, and you change routers, all bets are off. You will probably end up getting different dynamic IP addresses assigned to computers, and you may need to reconfigure your computer network names table during the contest. So it's just something to watch out for, is if you have to change your router during a contest. If you change computers during a contest, don't reuse the same station number. Create a new station number. Had a situation this past weekend where a multi-op station had a computer go down. They had a backup computer, and that's fine and dandy, but they assigned it the same station number as the computer that failed. They also assigned it the same IP address. However, because they tried to reuse the station number, well, it did not have the QSOs that were made by the failed computer. And the failed computer was the one that owned those QSOs. So what appeared to happen were QSOs suddenly got deleted on the other computers on the network, and it was not a good situation. So my point here is that if you need to add a computer during a contest or change a computer, create a new station number for that computer, edit the station name tables on each computer to add that new station number, and you should be in good shape. Again, as I said before, it's best to use the same exact network computer name table on every station. Make sure you use the same version of n1mm logger on every station. Had another situation in the 160 contest recently where the network seemed to be working just fine for a few hours, and then suddenly some of the stations couldn't talk to each other, and they were getting error messages popping up, and it was discovered that one of their computers was running a different version of n1mm logger. We do occasionally need to make changes in the operation for a network computer environment, and that will change the operation if they're not all running the same version of n1mm logger. Okay, next slide, Rich. Okay. WAN configurations are occasionally but rarely used with n1mm logger. The situations that have come up are special event stations that are located in geographically separate places, want to be able to interconnect all of their instances of n1mm logger. De-expeditions like the recent HK0NA de-expedition used n1mm logger in a WAN configuration. In the IARU contest, there are headquarter stations, and those headquarter stations can be distributed across an entire country. The CQ Worldwide Phone and CW contest have an extreme category where you specify before the contest what you're actually going to do, and one of the things that's possible is to have a distributed multi-multi station set up, and you'd want to use n1m in a WAN environment. Here's where it gets tricky if you're using a WAN environment. You really need to use static IP addresses or a virtual private network, a VPN. You cannot have those IP addresses be changing out from under you during the contest. I know folks have tried to use dynamic DNS and other similar capabilities out on the network, and that's a really big problem because if you're using dynamic DNS, the actual IP address can and will change out from under you without you ever knowing it happened, except that suddenly you've got computers that aren't talking to each other. So I really want to discourage folks from ever trying to use dynamic DNS unless you can be absolutely sure that for the length of the contest, the underlying IP address that the dynamic DNS server is assigning can't change. Okay, next slide, Rich. Okay, so now you've got everything configured. Now you're trying to make sure that all of your computers are actually talking to each other. So you want to bring up the info window on each station, and you want to look at those connection dots. Well, first thing you want to do to get things going is make sure you've got network computer mode checked over in the configure menu. Because if you don't have network computer mode checked, then it won't even try to go out on the network. Then the next thing you want to do is look at those connection dots. And I'll go into some detail on what those mean. Next slide, Rich. Okay. What you want to see in those connection dots are all of them green. Green means you got a good two-way TCP connection established, and both instances of n1mm logger are talking to each other. So green is good. Red means that a TCP connection is attempting to be established. So you've got one station trying to establish connection to another station. You're going to be in that red state for a maximum of about 30 to 45 seconds, and then you're going to change to either green, meaning everything's good, or blue, meaning things aren't good. One warning is that when you're in this red state, your n1mm logger response may be slow, meaning if somebody's trying to make QSOs while it's trying to establish a connection and in this red connection state, they may hit enter, and it could be several seconds before there's any response. However, as I said a moment ago, you're only going to stay in that red state for 30 to 45 seconds. So if things seem to be slow and you see that you're not fully connected, just hold on, because what's going to happen is you're either going to connect successfully and go to the green state, or you're going to go to the blue state. The blue state basically means that you're no longer actively trying to set up a TCP connection. All you're doing is waiting now for a UDP message to come from your peer, the other n1mm logger instance on the other computer, that says, hey, I'm alive now. And as long as that I'm alive message is not received, it's going to stay in that blue state, and n1mm logger will respond normally. In other words, it will be just as fast as normal. When it gets that I'm alive message, it's going to change from blue back to red. And then because it got that alive message, it should change very quickly from red over to green, meaning everything's good. There's one more connection state that you'll see rarely, and that's pink. Pink is kind of a halfway point. It means that we've got a TCP connection established between the two stations. However, the two instances of n1mm logger are not yet talking to each other. So it should change very quickly from pink to green. Okay, next slide, Rich. For those of you familiar with state diagrams, this is just a simplified way of stating what I stated in the previous slide, where you start up multi-computer, you're going to go to the red state. If the connection is successful, you're going to go to the green state. If you couldn't successfully connect after about 30 seconds, you're going to go to the blue state. And you get out of the blue state because an I'm alive message was received. So you go back to red, and at that point, you should make a successful connection over to the green state. Next slide, Rich. Okay, resyncs. As I mentioned earlier, a station only owns the contacts made by that station. And so contacts made by other stations are sent as each QSO is logged. And you can continue to make contacts when a station is offline. In other words, if you're in that red state or blue state and you're by yourself and not being able to communicate, you can continue to make contacts even though you're offline. But when you come back online, that is the connection dot changes from red to green, a resync is automatically initiated. Next slide, Rich. Okay, this is some detail on what's going on under the covers when there's a resync. So let's say station 0 and station 1 have lost connectivity. They've gone from the green connection dot to the red connection dot. And they've lost connectivity for who knows how long. Could have been just a minute. It could have been hours. So then what happens is station 1 comes back online. Station 0 and 1 are now talking to each other, and we go back to the green dot. So what happens is station 0 says, uh-oh, station 1 has come back. It is previously down. I'm going to go and delete all the contacts from station 1, because I don't know what station 1 could have been doing while we weren't communicating with each other. So it's going to move a copy of station 1's contacts to the deleted contest. And then station 0 is going to ask station 1, send me all your contacts. So at this point, station 0 has no contacts for station 1. They've been moved to the deleted contacts, and it's asked station 1, send me them. So station 1 sends all its contacts to station 0, and then at this point, station 0 now has an up-to-date copy of the station 1 log, and we've finished the resync. Now, of course, this works in the other direction too. Since station 0 and 1 weren't talking to each other, station 1 has to ask station 0 for its contacts. So it works in both directions. Next slide, Rich. Okay. This is a warning. I know any of you who have done multi-op have seen this happen, and station goes offline, get the red connection dot, the response from an n1mm is slow. In those first 30 or 45 seconds, they say, oh my gosh, I'm going to turn off network computer mode, something's wrong. And you get this warning message. Pay attention to the warning. Basically, you should not turn off network computer mode during the contest. Just have a little patience and wait for it to go to that blue connection state. But don't disable network computer mode. The n1mm logger team is working on making some pretty significant changes to this operation so that you won't have this warning and you can turn off network computer mode. There's actually were some changes made a few months ago, kind of part 1, but we can't put in part 2 yet without having a problem with forward and backward compatibility issues. We're trying to avoid a situation where somebody has a log, let's say, from CQ Worldwide, and they last year, and they try to run it on n1mm logger a year from now, and oops, it's not going to work right. So that's what I mean by these forward and backward compatibility issues. So that's why we've had to stagger the changes that we're in the process of making, which will eliminate this problem when you turn off network computer mode. Next slide, Rich. Okay, the contest is over. Before shutting down any of the computers on the network, you should initiate a sync, or resync, as we call it, from every computer. So you go over to the config menu, you choose Network Computer Tools, and under Network Computer Tools, you'll see Resync Logs by Date. And that will give you the option of resyncing the previous 48 hours worth of logs. So you want to do that from every computer. Basically, you're forcing a resync, forcing everybody to get contacts from every other station in the network, so everybody should have the exact same log when you're done. Next slide, please. Okay. I showed you briefly network computer tools in the previous slide. There's a whole bunch of things you can choose under there. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk to go into them, but in that whole block of options down below, the force other stations to stop transmitting, block my transmitter only if the station transmitting on the same band and mode, don't automatically change to S&P mode, and so on. Those are all described in the manual, what they do and when you would want to do them. And I think that's all I have about this. Ken, back to you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys. So at this point, we'll go ahead. Rich, you can leave the presentation up, and we'll go ahead and take questions. We have some that have come in already, and if you'd like to go ahead and send us one, please do. And so the first one, I'm just going to throw it out here. You guys jump in. I don't care who wants to take it. But first one comes from David, Kilo November 2 Mike. Can you direct me to a source or help file that provides guidance towards how to interface the computer with the radio to transmit audio for the function keys, especially SO2R operation, like how to select which radio will be transmitting the message and which one will not?
If this is in digital modes, the example is Rich here. The example I gave in SO2V had two different copies of MMTTY. One was configured to use the left channel and the other one used the right channel. So merely selecting the appropriate copy of MMTTY chose the appropriate channel. Of course, that requires that you have a stereo cable to the radio. In SO2R, there's two different ways to do it. One is to make up a cable that feeds audio from one radio into the left channel and audio from another radio into the right channel. The other way to do it is to have two separate sound cards, one for each radio, each one interfaced to its own sound card. That would allow you actually to have two VFOs on each of two radios if you did it that way. Now, I can't really speak for SSB switching. Steve would know more about that than me, but I think there are similarities, I think.
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing that you can use the right and left channels in SSB.
Okay, very good. Next question comes from Randy, Alpha Alpha 8 Romeo. How do you set up the right click to execute the enter key?
It's Rich here again. There's an option in the digital interface window. I've forgotten momentarily. I think it's actually in the setup menu. It says right click equals enter, not menu. If you don't use the option, right click will pull up a pop-up menu as it does in most windows. But if you select this option, right click turns to enter, and it's It's in the menu of the digital interface window.
Right, it's under Setup in the digital interface window. So if you click on Setup, about 8 choices down is right-click equals return not menu.
Okay, good. The next question comes from Claude VE2 Fox Kilo. Can you do SO2V on 2 different bands?
Bonjour, Claude. That depends on your radio. With my radio, an Elcraft K3, I can't do cross-band split, so I can't transmit on 2 different bands. I can receive on a different band, but I can't transmit on it. I couldn't tell you about other radios if they have the capability of transmitting on the subreceiver's frequency when the subreceiver's on a different band.
Okay, next question comes from John Kilo Charlie 0 Bravo Mike Fox. For field day we have 2 users with PCs and 1 with a Mac. Can the different systems be networked?
The answer to that is, I think in general the answer is no because of the Mac, but I am not a Mac user, and if there's possibly a way the Mac can emulate Windows, it might work.
Okay, this next one is probably for you as well, Steve. Comes from Jim, and just to reconfirm, so you should set each PC with a fixed IP and not use DHCP on the router? That's the preferred method, or? Go ahead.
Well, that would be the preferred method, although you can use DHCP in a LAN environment as long as you don't change routers during the contest, because at least in my experience, when you use DHCP and keep the same router and keep the same computers, you will always be assigned the same IP address.
Okay, Ed, WB0VHF. If a PC is removed from the network, do the QSOs remain with the other nodes?
The QSOs remain with the other nodes until that PC comes back on the network, and then a resync will be started at that point.
All right. Next question from Bob, K0RC. If you have a 4-computer network and a 5th computer sitting on the shelf as a cold spare, is there any issue of pre-assigning a 5th IP address into the network table of the 4 active stations? My thought is to avoid interrupting operators while pulling the bad computer and installing the replacement.
No, that should not be a problem. It's, that 5th computer, if it's not turned on and doesn't have n1mm logger running on it, is going to initially go to that red connection state. But 30 seconds later, it's going to go to the blue connection state and have no performance impact on the rest of the computers in the network.
All right. Ted, W4NZ, does it matter which order you put the computers into the network computer mode?
No, it does not matter.
All right. Couple more questions here, and if anyone would like to try to speak directly to the presenters, you have a microphone connected. What I'd ask you to do is to the left of your control panel, there's a little rectangular grab tab, and there's a hand on there. If you push that hand, just like raising your hand in a classroom, I'll pick you up here in a minute. We'll unmute your mic and try to bring you into the presentation. That's if someone wants to speak directly on the webinar to the presenters. Another question from Ed, WB0VHF. Are all of the n1mm supported contests available for multi-station network access, especially thinking of state QSO parties?
Yes, the answer is yes. I've certainly used network computers for the 7th Coloria QSO party when we've done multi-multi in that.
Right. Ray NM20 is wondering how n1mm handles band changes for a particular radio. In multi-ops, radios might change bands.
Not sure I totally understand that question. Assuming you have an interfaced radio interfaced to the computer, there's no problem if you change bands. as you start to make QSOs in the new band, everybody in the network is going to have that logged against the new band.
Okay, one more question here. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and fire them in now. This one comes from Adriano PY2ADR down in Brazil. It's a good question. In the multi-op mode, does n1mm work as an interlock? And, you know, station 1 is transmitting. Does it lock out the second station?
Take a look at those network computer tools that I had in the last slide or next to last slide. There's several different options you can choose from there for a lockout, and those are described in the manual.
Okay, another question for Steve comes from Stan. Any tips on dealing with firewalls? And I'm assuming this is in relation to WAN connection.
There are certain ports that both TCP and UDP that need to be opened up. I don't recall off the top of my head exactly which ones, but it is in the manual, or you can send me some email and I can help you out there on what ports need to be opened.
Okay, well that does it. So guys, I don't know, do you have anything else you want to add here before I take it over?
No, I just encourage folks to join the n1mm Logger Yahoo group forum and post questions there. I think there's a very responsive group that will answer it, both the presenters and a number of other very talented and experienced folks that monitor the forum and answer questions.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to take this occasion to thank the four of you for putting together this series, and we have been talking a little bit about doing one on SO2R. Seems to be quite a bit of interest in that as well. And as we mentioned, these are recorded and they're put up on the PVRC webpage, www.pvrc.org, and you can go back there and watch them again if need be. So the next presentation we have scheduled right now is for April 1st, and that is with Steve Ford, WB8IMY of the ARRL, and it's his presentation on getting started in digital contesting. You can register for that also by going to the PVRC webpage, and we'll send out some reminders as that time gets a little bit closer. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this presentation. Glad you could do it, and we'll look for you next time. 73s, take care. So long.